So in my last video, I discussed a little bit about my very impressionable first year of college, and it truly was. This was the time that I had called the missionary that I had picked up literature from the campus, and this was also the same year that I discovered Joseph Campbell. If you're a little bit older, you have probably heard of Joseph Campbell. And he had a series called The Power of Myth, which was basically dialogues with the journalist Bill Moyers. And this was featured as a PBS special, released, I believe, in 1988. And this was a couple years after it was released. I'm watching it with my dad, and I'm completely captivated by the conversation. And one of the most impressionable things that happened for me was on episode 4. There was a discussion about Buddha and Christ, and it was the very first time that I had ever heard of a symbolic interpretation that crossed from one religious tradition to another. And it had to do with the Bodhi Tree and the tree of the cross. And Joseph Campbell basically found a symbolic link between these, which threw me for a loop, because I, up to that point, had imagined the truth of the cross, the truth of the resurrection, the truth of the actual historical event as being nothing other than what it was. And here was this man who was looking and finding symbols or interrelationships between them. And that was all fine and good, but at the time, I first of all said, hell no, no. You can't do that. You can't reinterpret the cross as being something that's linked over with another religion. I wasn't going to go there. At the same time, I was quite enchanted by this very wise man, Joseph Campbell, who was so educated and so broadly exposed to traditions that I couldn't help myself but imagine, well, there must be other ways of thinking. And so this was what I would call the beginning of a total break with naive faith, and also the entrance of not a deep doubt, but the beginnings of a true doubt to how I had understood Christianity and the Christian story up to that point. I can imagine there were thousands, if not millions, of other people who had their own similar breaks, not necessarily with the Joseph Campbell material, but just what does it mean to encounter this story juxtapositioned with a completely different tradition? What do you make of that? Can there be a symbolic truth that exists between the Bodhi tree and that of Christ on the tree? Those were difficult questions to answer for me at the time. And what I wanted to say in this particular video is just the impression it made, first of resistance, but then doubt. And I'm sure many of us have similar experiences of hearing ideas that we don't agree with, but if we don't have a good answer to them, we might be challenged. At the same time, there's something very satisfying about symbolic reality and the potential that different religions have different, as it's called in the Jungian system, archetypes, which certainly Joseph Campbell borrowed and was deeply influenced by Jung's work. What are these symbolic realities that are expressed in different world religions? Are we to be afraid of them? And if we are a person of faith, say a person of the Christian faith, what do we do with them? So I wanted to just introduce this as a very important point in my own development, first of all, and then to just give some warnings, because the academic study of religion, which is done on campuses, is done by very smart people who tend to be themselves not practitioners. Rather, they're making a study of religion. There's much that could be interesting and gathered from that, from a comparative understanding of religion. And at the same time, the lived experience of religion, especially the lived experience of anyone, any religion, but particular Christianity, is not there. And what we're going to be able to see in the Joseph Campbell is he introduces very deep Gnostic influences. In fact, he's completely seduced by the Nag Hammadi discovery of the Gospel of Thomas, which was discovered in the mid-40s, right at the same time as the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Now, according to the normal way of thinking about the Christian religion, we cannot identify with Jesus. We have to imitate Jesus, but to say, I am God, as Jesus said, is for us blasphemy.
We see in Joseph Campbell is the seduction of the sense that self can determine if not itself is divinity. Self becomes divinity, and the only divinity, because there's nothing outside of us, ends up being ourselves.
However, in the Thomas Gospel, Jesus says, he who drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I shall be he. Wow, that's Buddhism.
And to use a big word, and call that apotheosis. And apotheosis is this idea of making something divine. And what tends to happen in the 20th century with academics and with smart, educated people is they want to go about living the life that they want to live. And they respect the sacred, but they certainly, from what I can see, are very unwilling to submit themselves to the true humility and the true repentance that's offered in Christianity, and not to mention other practices from other religions. So just as I conclude this video with some commentary specifically about what Joseph Campbell does in his equating Christianity and the Gnostic tradition with Buddhism, which he compares and makes the two of these appear to be the same thing within the tradition of the Gospel of Thomas, which basically says, I am the divine. I am the Buddha. I am the one that wakes up. And as I mentioned in my first video, I did become Buddhist. I was very open to those ideas. And certainly this conversation with Bill Moyers allowed me to open my mind to these other possibilities. And with that, we'll leave it there for next time. Thank you for your opportunity to be here with you on Christ Revisited. We'll see you next time.